Without further ado, we'll hand you over to Dr. Brian Boyle from ATU Sligo.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, right. So the first thing is there's been a theme here about the importance of data. And I think the two big ideas that motivated our paper were that there seems to be a sort of an interesting phenomenon in our world where the data around climate change is absolutely solid. I mean, the natural science, the mechanisms through which climate change operates, they're all very well understood, absolutely well defined, and absolutely well confirmed, right? So we have all the scientific information. And in our world, we often think that scientific understanding leads to definitive action. And yet what we find is that the more science we have, the clearer we become about the problem, the less we seem to actually act. And so that in a way means that we have a sort of a prima facie question, why is that happening? And then to my mind, there's a second thing which is going on, which is that a lot of people understand, as I said, the natural scientific mechanisms. I would argue the link between climate change and capitalism is far less well understood, and it should be better understood. And to my mind, the social scientific link between the two is also extremely clear within the data. So if you go and look at the World Bank, if you look at sort of all of the various international agencies that carry data, and you map that data against the emissions, it's clear that it's not just an industrial revolution, it's an industrial revolution under the impetus of capitalist social relations of production. That's what's happened, right? And so, you know, the capitalist economy is rooted in a logic of profitability for each individual unit of capital. And each of those units of capital is strongly encouraged to grow in order to remain competitive. If they grow and remain competitive, well, then they continue to outcompete other rivals that don't grow. And so the logic of each unit of capital is growth, and then that's sort of buttressed and reinforced by national state policy, which is about growing the economy. So that's what's going on. And to my mind, if you're looking at the young economist and you're looking for data sets and you're looking for the question of well-defined and confirmed data, there's very little beyond that's more defined and well confirmed than the science around climate change. And so then the question becomes, well, okay, so what would be the things that hold us back from acting effectively and acting efficiently? And there are many of those, and they go to a whole series of things. But as educators, we are thinking in the paper, what is the role of education and pedagogy within this whole space? Because as I said, like I also teach a little bit about the economics of climate change and sustainability, and students, to my mind, have a bias towards thinking about it in terms of individual action. That's not because they lick that off stones. It's because what they tend to get from society is individual action is how we'll solve this problem. So they tend towards the individual rather than the systemic solution. And they tend to think about it slightly in moralistic terms about, if I don't act, there's a problem because, as opposed to thinking, are there wider systemic logics to why, even when I do act, it doesn't make very much difference? Or if you want to do it in a cost benefit analysis, even if I do act, will the costs ever outweigh, or sorry, will the benefits ever outweigh the cost when all of the benefits are sort of collective for the whole of humanity and the costs revolve on me, or resolve down towards me? So anyway, what the paper tries to do then is to try and say, okay, so how has economics grappled with the question of climate change and sustainability? And on the one hand, in a formal sense, it is now part of the curriculum. It's one of the key strands in second level education, as people know, and probably know much better than I do these days. But on the other hand, what we try and show in the paper is that the key categories of economics normalize and naturalize profit making. And they sort of normalize and naturalize the key agents of capitalism, because back when economics developed, if you want to take a starting point as Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, what we point out is that at that stage, the key challenge for progressive thinkers was, how do we liberate humanity enough from the constraints of feudal systems, and how do we then give them the kind of property right protection that allows them to go off and do individual things that then have collectively positive results? And our argument is that at that stage, that was a progressive move, because it was arguing that we've lived in societies where we've never had enough And the way to get more is to allow for better property rights, to understand self-interest as a key motivation, and to try and create social systems that allow those things to generate wealth for all. And so the categories and the concepts were developed in a context, in a historical context. And so the pedagogical argument that we're making is you have to understand concepts critically, and you have to understand them in their socio and in historical context. Those categories today are fundamentally, to my mind, operating in a different context where we have more and more freedom for the likes of an Elon Musk. There's very little that constrains very, very wealthy people today. And the idea that we can continually create wealth and, have an unproblematic support for growth, limitless growth, is, to my mind, very problematic. So the second section tries to say, how would we understand these categories in their historical context, and are they still applicable, and are they still concepts that we should unproblematically teach to our students today? And then the final section looks at the same kind of questions from the more micro side. So it looks at the key idea that in all of our textbooks, when you go into economics, within the first week or two, you'll be told that the fundamental core key concepts, the foundational ideas in microeconomics are the individual choice in conditions of scarcity. So that individuals are making rational, maximizing choices in conditions of scarcity. And the argument we just make is that actually scarcity is a concept that itself can't just be unproblematically developed. Scarcity meant something in classical economics to do with the lack of material wealth. But in microeconomics, it means never being satisfied. That scarcity is rooted in the drive of the individual to always want more than they have currently. And whilst that can be a very positive thing on a micro level, it means that what you're saying is that human nature is such that we will always aspire to have more and more. And that sort of underpins the idea that capitalism is the most natural system. And so again, you don't have to agree with the political economy of the argument. Obviously, it's coming from the left. But the point of it is that you have to be able to to critically appraise the key concepts of your discipline and ask whether they are actually are they smuggling in ideologies and political economies that maybe need to be challenged in the context of the climate crisis. So to summarize and stop talking, I would say that, the argument we're making, all of the things that Kevin said, I agreed with in terms of trying to think about your research in terms of a question, trying to think, how can we pose things that are important to us and to the reader so that we can take them with us? How do we make a logical argument, which you may not fundamentally agree with politically, but it's, you might think that it has logical coherence. And then how do you back that up with strong logical argument and with empirical data?